Hello everyone, this is Colin once again. I just wanted to make this video because I know that it's Passover and then tomorrow is Easter, and I made a video a couple years back, I think it was on Easter, talking about the theology behind Easter. I was actually responding to the Zeitgeist movie, and I wanted to make this video, and this is completely different than what I've done in the past. I'm going to be reading some pages from Joseph Campbell's book, Thou Art That. And in the parts I'm going to be reading, he mentions Passover and Easter, and it's in the part of the book called the discussion. So he's being interviewed by somebody. So while I'm reading this, I'll say who's speaking, and then I just thought it would be an interesting way of looking at Easter and Passover from a more symbolic and metaphorical perspective. So we start with let's see here. The individual who's talking to Joseph Campbell is an individual named Kennedy. So Kennedy says, we are, according to many observers, at a turning point in religious consciousness. That is, the mythological structure, the legends that undergirded a literal biblical interpretation of the universe, are sharply challenged by the discoveries of the space age. Campbell, yes, that's exactly what is happening, with consequences we can all see. One must remember the central truth, for example, about Easter and Passover. We are called out of the house of bondage. Even the Jews were called out of their bondage in Egypt. We are called out of bondage in the way in which the moon throws off its shadow to emerge anew, in the way that life throws off the shadow of death. Easter and Passover have the same roots. We are called out of bondage to our old tradition. Easter is not Easter, and Passover is not Passover, unless they release us from the tradition that gives us these fears. Easter and Passover are prime symbols for what we are faced with in the space age. We are challenged both mystically and socially because our ideas of the universe have been reordered by our experience in space. The consequence in that we can no longer hold on to the religious symbols that we formulated when we thought that the Earth was the center of the universe. Kennedy, you're saying that the perennial power of myth is that it can shed one formulation, such as the pre-Copernican notion of Earth down here and heaven up there, and yet retain and renew its strength. That means that we are experiencing the mythological truth and the very challenge to give up the religious understanding of the universe that is very strong in Judeo-Christian imagery, and that the Passover-Easter experience demands that we do that. Campbell, Easter and Passover makes us experience in ourselves a call out of bondage, yes, but so experiencing them does not destroy the religious tradition. Understanding these symbols in their transcendent spiritual sense enables us to see and to possess our religious tradition freshly. The space age demands that we change our views about ourselves, but we want to hold on to them. That is why there is a resurgence of old-fashioned orthodoxy in so many areas at the present time. There are no horizons in space, and there can be no horizons on our own experience. We cannot hold on to ourselves and our in-groups as we once did. The space age makes that impossible, but people reject this demand or don't want to think about it. So they pull back into one church or black power or the unions or the capitalist class. Kennedy, then the space age challenges everything that makes us Earth-centered or group-centered. Campbell, Easter and Passover offer the perfect symbols because they mean that we are called to a new life. This new life is not very well defined. That is why we want to hold on to the past. The journey to this new life, and it is a journey we must all make, cannot be made unless we let go of the past. The reality of living in space means that we are born anew, not born again to an old-time religion, but to a new order of things. There are no horizons, that is the meaning of the space age. We are in free fall into a future that is mysterious. It is very fluid, and this is disconcerting to many people. All you have to do is know how to use a parachute. Kennedy, an awareness of mythological truth alerts us to the fact that in the Easter experience we do not just remember historical events, but that we are experiencing in ourselves Passover and Easter. That what we feel is the pull of the space age on our own religious consciousness. Campbell, yes, we feel it in ourselves. The space age, which many people want to forget or write off as bad investment, is central to all of this. Almost 15 years ago, we had the great symbol of change that has taken place. Men stood on the moon and looked back and by television we were able to look back with them to see Earth rise. That is the symbol that enabled us to feel the truth of discovery that Copernicus made 4¼ centuries ago. Until then, we may have agreed theoretically with Copernicus, but his map of the universe was now available to us, except to mathematicians and astronomers. It was an invisible idea, and we could go on thinking as we did about a religious idea in which everything was divided along the same lines, that the heavens and the earth were divided. And now I'm skipping to a later part in the same interview. Let's see here. Kennedy asks him, how would you define mythology here? Campbell, my favorite definition of mythology, other people's religion. My favorite definition of religion, misunderstanding of mythology. The misunderstanding consists in the reading of the spiritual mythological symbols as though they were primarily references to historical events. Localized, provisional readings separate the various religious communities. Re-mythologization, recapturing the mythological meaning, reveals a common spirituality of mankind. At Easter, to return to our example, we might suggest the renewal of the knowledge of our general spiritual life through casting off for a moment our various historical connections. Kennedy, re-mythologization would rescue the stories of the Bible then from historical literalism and its susceptibility to debunking. Can we connect that with the example of the Easter experience? What of the cross and the crucifixion? Campbell, if we think of the crucifixion only in historical terms, we lose the reference of the symbol immediately to ourselves. Jesus left his mortal body on the cross and the sign of the earth, and to go to the Father with whom he was one. We similarly are to identify with the eternal life that is within us. The symbol at the same time tells us of God's willing acceptance of the cross, that is to say, participation in the trials and sorrows of human life in the world, so that he is here with us, not by way of fall or a mistake, but with rapture and joy. Thus the cross has a dual sense. One, our going to the divine, and the other, the coming of the divine to us. It is a true crossing. Kennedy, what about the symbols of Easter and Passover? How would one, as you've said, let go of these in order to possess them anew in this first generation of the space age? Campbell, what has always been basic to resurrection or Easter is crucifixion. If you want to resurrect, you must have crucifixion. Too many interpretations of the crucifixion have failed to emphasize that. They emphasize the calamity of the event. And if you emphasize calamity, then you look for someone to blame. That's why people have blamed the Jews for it. But it is not calamity if it leads to new life. Through the crucifixion, we were unshelled. We were able to be born to resurrection. That is not a calamity. We must look freshly at this so that symbolism can be sensed. St. Augustine speaks of going to the cross as a bridegroom to his bride. There is an affirmation here. In the Prado, there's a great painting by Titian of Simon of Cyrene as he willingly helps Jesus with the cross. The picture captures the human participation, the free voluntary participation we all must have in the Easter Passover mystery. Kennedy, so one must step out of one's tradition to see it clearly again. Campbell, that is what we are challenged to do. Self-preservation is only the second law of life. The first law is that you and the other are one. The politicians love to talk about, I worship in my way and he in his, but that doesn't make sense if we are one with each other. That is the truth of the space age urges on us, but many religious institutions resist it. Kennedy, perhaps we can explore the Easter Passover symbolism in more detail. These feasts, calculated according to the full moon, share much in common. Campbell, here we face very similar themes in the Jewish and Christian traditions. The themes is also found in mystery religions in which Adonis dies and is resurrected. Kennedy, and all these come at springtime, matching the bursting forth of flowers, the return of the sun. Even the poignant longing we experience at this season must be related to this. Campbell, yes, it is very much the longing to be born anew the way nature is. All these elements fit together. Easter is calculated as the Sunday that follows the first full moon after the vernal equinox. It is evidence of a concern centuries before Christ to coordinate the lunar and solar calendars. What we have to recognize is that these celestial bodies represented to the ancients two different modes of eternal life. One engaged in the field of time, like throwing off death as the moon its shadow to be born again. The other disengaged and eternal. The dating of Easter according to both lunar and solar calendars suggests that life, like the light that is reborn in the moon and eternal in the sun, finally is one. Kennedy, what of some of the folk symbols of Easter and Passover? Do they all have similar lunar and solar resonations? Campbell, there is to begin with the rabbit, the Easter bunny. Many peoples of the world see the rabbit in the shadows of the moon. The rabbit is associated with the dying and the resurrection of the moon. The egg is shelled off by the chick, as the shadow of the moon is by the moon reborn, or as slow by the birth of the spirit at Easter. Birds in flight are symbolic of the spirit released from the bondage of earth. So the moon rabbit, the cast-off eggshell, and the just-born bird that is to fly give us together a playful, childlike reading of the Easter message. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Hope everyone has a wonderful Passover and a happy Easter. Peace be with you all.